Somewhere on this island, in low grey buildings that most people will never enter, machines are drawing lines into silicon. Lines thinner than a strand of your own DNA. Patterns too small for any human eye to resolve, printed with light, in air cleaner than an operating room. The phone in your hand was born here, so was the processor in your laptop. The chips inside the servers that answer your questions, guide the missiles, steer the cars. More than 90% of the most advanced semiconductors on Earth come from this one place. And according to most of the world's governments, this place is not a country. It has a president. It has an army of nearly 200,000. It prints its own money, issues its own passports, holds its own elections. 23 million people live here under their own laws, but it holds no seat at the United Nations. Fewer than 15 nations formally recognize it. The country next door, the largest nation on the planet, insists this island is a province in rebellion and has promised for more than 70 years to take it back. Both things are true at the same time. The modern world cannot function without this island, and the modern world will not officially say its name. So how does a place become indispensable to everyone and belong, on paper, to no one? This is Taiwan, an island roughly the size of the Netherlands, hung in the sea between Japan and the Philippines, 160 kilometers off the coast of mainland China. On the map, it looks like a leaf. A sweet potato, the locals say, and they mean it fondly, because the sweet potato grows anywhere, in any soil, and refuses to die. That refusal is the oldest thing about this place. Long before the chips, before the skyscrapers, before any of the empires that would come to claim it, Taiwan was already a place people left. Thousands of years ago, the first people here were not Chinese. They were Austronesians, seafarers, navigators, builders of outrigger canoes, and the language they spoke would go on to travel farther than almost any language in human history. Linguists tracing the roots of that family have followed it across half the planet, to the Philippines, to Borneo and Java, west across the entire Indian Ocean to Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, east into the vast emptiness of the Pacific, all the way to Hawaii, to Easter Island, to New Zealand. More than 1,000 languages, spoken today by nearly 400 million people, spread across a third of the globe. And a great many scholars believe they all trace back to a single homeland, this island. The ancestors of half the Pacific launched their canoes from these shores and never looked back. Remember that, the island people sailed away from. It matters more later than it seems now. And their descendants are still here. 16 indigenous peoples, formally recognized, each with its own language, its own weaving, its own memory of the mountains. The Amis, the Atayal, the Paiwan, the Bunun, who sing a harvest hymn in 8 overlapping voices, a music so complex that scholars once refused to believe it could come from a people without written notation. But being first did not mean being safe. As settlers poured in from the mainland, the indigenous peoples were pushed off the fertile plains and up into the mountains, their land taken, their numbers thinned by disease and war. Some groups of the lowlands were absorbed so completely that their languages fell silent. Even among later settlers, Dialects have been slipping away. Two of the Hakka tongues are nearly gone. Whole ways of speaking have vanished from this island within living memory. And yet the 16 nations are still here, reviving their languages, teaching the old weaving and the old harvest songs to children who are learning them again, on purpose. The tattooed faces have gone from the mountains, but the memory is being carried forward deliberately by people who refuse to let it end. For most of human history, this was their island alone. The outside world barely knew it existed. Chinese records called it a place of fog and headhunters, a day and a half by boat, not worth the crossing. Then, in the 17th century, the crossing began. The Dutch came first in 1624, looking for a base to trade silk and porcelain with Japan and China. They built a fort of brick and mortar on the sandbars of the southwest coast and called the island Formosa, the beautiful one. The Spanish landed in the north. For a few decades, European flags flew over an island most of Europe couldn't find. The town they founded is still there. Tainan, the oldest city in Taiwan, and for a long time, its capital. Walk its oldest streets today, and the layers are all still visible. A Dutch fort, its foundations sunk into what is now dry land, because the sea has retreated 3 centuries since the ships anchored here. Temples older than any building in most of the New World. Narrow lanes that smell of incense and frying oil and salt. Tainan was the capital for more than 200 years, and it wears that history the way an old person wears their years, without hurry. This is the island's kitchen. Many of Taiwan's most beloved dishes are said to have been born here, handed down in families that have run the same stall for a century. It is the island's temple city too. Some say there are more shrines to the square block here than anywhere else in Taiwan. The gods are old in Tainan, and they are crowded. But the Dutch did not hold it. In 1662, a man arrived who would become the island's first great legend of the defeated. His name was Zheng Chenggong, known in the West as Koxinga. He was a Ming loyalist, and his cause was already lost. The Ming dynasty had fallen on the mainland to the Manchu conquerors of the Qing. Koxinga refused to accept it. He gathered a fleet, crossed the strait, and after a siege of 9 months, forced the Dutch to surrender their fort. He made Taiwan the last redoubt of a dynasty that no longer existed anywhere else. A government in exile, on an island, dreaming of a mainland it would never retake. If that story sounds familiar, hold on to it. History on this island has a habit of rhyming. Koxinga died within a year of his victory, at 37. His kingdom lasted a generation before the Qing swallowed it too. And for the next 200 years, Taiwan was a frontier of the Chinese Empire, settled by waves of migrants from Fujian and Guangdong, provinces just across the water, who cleared the lowlands for rice and sugar and pushed the indigenous peoples up into the mountains. Those mountains are the reason Taiwan is what it is, because for all the empires that have claimed this island, the island itself is younger than almost any of them. Geologically, Taiwan is barely finished being born. Off the eastern coast, deep beneath the sea, the Philippine Sea Plate is grinding into the edge of the Eurasian Plate. Not sliding past, colliding, head-on. One plate driving under and lifting the other, folding the seabed upward, buckling stone into ridgelines. The result is one of the fastest rising mountain ranges on the surface of the Earth. The island is being pushed skyward faster than erosion can wear it back down. 268 peaks rise above 3,000 meters. On an island you could drive across in a couple of hours, the land climbs from tropical beach to alpine snow. At the center stands Yushan, Jade Mountain, 3,952 meters, the highest summit in Northeast Asia. Higher than anything in Japan except Fuji. And all of it is still moving, still rising, still shaking, because the same collision that built these mountains never stopped. Taiwan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, the belt of fault lines where most of the world's earthquakes are born. Since 1980 alone, the island and its waters have registered around 2,000 earthquakes of magnitude 4 or greater. The people here have learned to live on ground that will not hold still. On the morning of April 3rd, 2024, at 4 minutes before 8, the ground moves. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake strikes off the coast near the eastern city of Hualien, the strongest the island has felt in 25 years. Buildings lean into the streets at impossible angles. Landslides bury the mountain roads. In the marble canyon of Taroko, boulders the size of trucks come down without warning. 19 people die. More than 1,100 are injured. Whole villages are cut off, reachable only by helicopter. And then, this is the part outsiders find hard to believe, within days, the island is largely running again. The trains move. The chip factories, built to survive exactly this, barely miss a shift. Taiwan has been rehearsing for the Earth's violence for so long that catastrophe has become something closer to routine. Nowhere is that rehearsal more visible than at Taroko Gorge. Here, on the eastern flank of the mountains, a river called the Liwu has spent millions of years cutting downward through solid marble. The rock is white and grey and veined, polished by water into walls that rise hundreds of meters straight up, so narrow in places that the sky becomes a thin blue ribbon far overhead. The marble was once seabed, limestone laid down by ocean creatures, buried, crushed, cooked deep in the earth, then heaved up into the light by the same collision, still lifting the whole island. To stand at the bottom of Taroko is to stand inside geologic time made visible. The ocean floor, turned to stone, turned to canyon, all above your head. The people of these gorges are the Truku, one of the 16 indigenous nations. For centuries they lived in these mountains, hunting, weaving, tattooing the faces of those who had proven themselves. The Japanese, when they came, fought bitter wars to subdue them. The mountains did not give up their people easily, and the mountains do not give up their dead easily either. Every large earthquake reshapes the gorge. Rockfalls seal old trails, new scars open on the cliffs. The Taroko you can walk today is not the Taroko your parents walked or the one your children will. The canyon is a work still in progress, being carved and buried and carved again. But not everything that lives in these mountains walks on two legs or leaves a trail. High in the broadleaf forest, on the steep middle slopes where few people ever go, lives an animal that has become the soul of the island. The Formosan black bear. It is Taiwan's largest land animal, and it is found nowhere else on Earth. On its chest, it wears a pale marking, a broad V of cream-colored fur, as if someone had painted the crescent of a moon across its heart. The people here call it exactly that, the moon bear. There may be only around 800 of them left in the wild. They are shy to the point of invisibility. A hiker can spend a lifetime in these forests and see only tracks or claw marks scored high on the bark of a tree. For years, the science of the bears rested largely on the work of a single researcher, a woman who tracked and tagged them through the roughest country in Taiwan, and who came to be known, affectionately, as the island's Mother of the Bears. The moon bear survives because the mountains are too steep to fully tame. In a place that has paved and built and manufactured its way to the front of the modern world, the high forest remains a refuge, the one part of Taiwan that could not be turned into a factory. The bear endures in the gap the machines could not reach. And in the cold, clear streams that run down from these same peaks lives something even stranger: a salmon. That should not be possible. Salmon belong to the cold north, to Alaska, to Siberia, to the rivers of the far latitudes. They have no business in the streams of a subtropical island that sits almost on the Tropic of Cancer. But the Formosan salmon is here, and it has been here for a very long time. During the last ice age, when the seas were colder and salmon ranged much farther south, these fish swam up the rivers of Taiwan to spawn, as salmon do. Then, the ice age ended. The world warmed. The lowland rivers grew too hot, and the sea route home was closed forever. The salmon that were trapped upstream did not die. They adapted. They gave up the ocean entirely and learned to live their whole lives in a few frigid mountain creeks, thousands of feet up, cut off from every other salmon on Earth. They are a relic of a vanished world, a living memory of an ice age that ended 10,000 years ago. And they are barely holding on, a few thousand fish in a handful of streams, one warm summer away from disappearing. Remember the marooned salmon, an animal that lost the world it was made for and refused to stop existing anyway. We will come back to it, because it is not really a story about a fish. The salmon is not alone in its strangeness. This one island is a machine for making creatures that live nowhere else. The reason is the mountains and the ice. During the ice ages, when the seas fell, land bridges rose between Taiwan and the mainland, and animals and plants crossed over. Then, the ice melted. The sea returned. The bridge sank, and everything that had crossed was marooned on the island, cut off to evolve on its own. Do that again and again across millions of years. Then, stack on top of it a landscape that climbs from tropical coast to alpine peak in the space of a few dozen kilometers. What you get is a laboratory of isolation. Each mountain becomes its own island in the sky, its cold summit walled off from the next by warm valleys no alpine creature can cross. And so the island fills with life, found on this island and no other. More than half of Taiwan's land mammals, the great majority of its freshwater fish, around 1,000 kinds of plant. The Mikado pheasant, a shy, iridescent bird of the high forest, so emblematic that it is printed on the island's largest banknote. The Taiwan blue magpie, long-tailed and brilliant, that the people here call the long-tailed mountain lady. And down on the coast in winter, the island receives a different kind of guest. Along the mudflats of the southwest, where the rivers slow into the sea, a rare and elegant bird arrives each year on the tide of migration. The black-faced spoonbill. It sweeps its broad black bill side to side through the shallows to feed. There are only a few thousand of these birds left in the entire world, and more than half of them choose to spend their winter here, on the flats of this one island. Consider that. Of all the coastlines in Asia, the rarest of spoonbills come to Taiwan to survive the cold and leave again in spring. The island its own ancestors once sailed away from is, for these birds, the place worth flying to. And once a year, in a warm southern valley called Maolin, the island stages a migration of its own, one so rare that only one other like it is known anywhere on Earth. As winter comes, millions of purple crow butterflies pour down from the highlands into a handful of sheltered valleys, where the air stays just warm enough to carry them through the cold. They gather on the branches in shimmering, wing-folded multitudes, their dark wings catching the light with a deep, metallic sheen. Only one other butterfly on the planet is known to overwinter in valleys in such numbers: the monarchs of Mexico. A fragile insect weighing almost nothing, navigating by the angle of the sun to the exact valleys its ancestors used, generation after generation. On an island of earthquakes and empires and machines finer than atoms, the butterflies keep their appointment. They have been keeping it far longer than any of it has existed. Down from the high peaks, the mountains soften into something gentler. Ridges of cloud forest, slopes stitched with tea. This is Alishan, a range of misty mountains in the island's center, famous for two things. The first is the sunrise. Before dawn, travelers ride a narrow railway up through the fog to wait above a sea of cloud and watch the sun break over the distant peak of Yushan, turning the mist to gold. People have made this small pilgrimage for over a century. The second thing is the tea. High mountain oolong, grown in the cool and the cloud, where the slow ripening concentrates the flavor into something the whole tea-drinking world prizes. Families have tended these slopes for generations, picking by hand, the knowledge passed from parent to child like an inheritance of the soil itself. And that little railway that carries the travelers to the sunrise, it was not built for them. It was built by an empire. In 1895, Taiwan changed hands again, this time as the spoils of a war it had no part in. China, defeated by Japan, signed the island away in a treaty. For the next 50 years, Taiwan was a Japanese colony. The Japanese wanted the island's timber and its resources, and they built the infrastructure to extract them. The Alishan Railway was a logging line, laid to haul giant cypress trees down from the high forest to the ports. The Japanese cut the ancient groves. They took the wood. They ran the island for the benefit of Tokyo. And here is the contradiction that Taiwan has never fully resolved. The same colonizer that stripped the forests also built the railways, the harbors, the schools, the hospitals, the rice paddies, irrigation. When Japanese rule ended in 1945, it left behind not just wounds, but foundations, an educated population, and a modern spine of infrastructure that much of the rest of Asia did not yet have. To this day, older Taiwanese may speak Japanese. Japanese cuisine and design are woven into daily life. The relationship with the former colonizer is warmer here than almost anywhere else Japan once ruled. The oppressor's railway became the beloved train to the sunrise. Both things are true, and the island holds them both. There is a memory older than any empire here, though, and it does not live in a railway or a fort. It lives in a museum, in a set of crates that have been running from war for almost 100 years. On the northern edge of Taipei stands the National Palace Museum. It holds one of the greatest collections of Chinese art on Earth, nearly 700,000 pieces of jade and bronze and porcelain and ink, spanning 8,000 years of civilization. Almost none of it was made in Taiwan. These are the imperial treasures of the Forbidden City, the private collection of the emperors of China, accumulated across 1,000 years of dynasties. And the story of how they came to sit on an island the emperors barely thought about is one of the most extraordinary rescues in the history of human culture. It begins in the 1930s, on the mainland, with the sound of cartwheels at night. Japan is invading. Its armies are closing on Beijing, and the keepers of the Forbidden City make a decision. The collection must not fall into the hands of an invading army. So, under cover of darkness, curators begin packing the treasures of the Chinese emperors into crates, 19,000 of them, cushioned in cotton and straw, sealed and carried by wooden cart out through the ancient gates to the railway. What follows is a 14-year odyssey across a country at war. The crates travel by train and truck and riverboat, and on the backs of porters, deep into the interior, always one step ahead of the Japanese advance. They are hidden in temples, stored in caves. Bombs fall near them and miss. Not a single one of the most important pieces is lost. And then, when the war with Japan finally ends, the treasures cannot rest, because a new war has begun. The Chinese Civil War. The nationalists, the Kuomintang, who govern China, against Mao Zedong's communists. And the nationalists are losing.
In the winter of 1948,
with the communists advancing and the mainland slipping away, the nationalist government makes a final choice about the treasures it has spent 14 years protecting. It will take the very best of them, and it will carry them across the sea. 3 ships, roughly 3,000 crates, chosen as the finest of the finest. They sail from a mainland harbor across the Taiwan Strait to the island port of Keelung. The last ship arrives in early 1949. The imperial collection of China had survived Japanese bombs, 1,000 miles of war-torn road, and the fall of 2 governments by fleeing. Again and again, it survived by refusing to stay still. Remember those crates and what it took to keep them. They are not finished running yet. Because they were not the only thing that crossed the strait in 1949. As the communists took the mainland, the entire nationalist government fled to Taiwan. Its leader, Chiang Kai-shek, its army, and a wave of soldiers, officials, and refugees. Around 1.5 to 2 million people poured onto an island of 6 million who had lived under Japanese rule and did not ask for new masters. Just as Koxinga had done 3 centuries before, a defeated government made this island its last stand. A government in exile, calling itself the True China, ruling a territory a fraction of the size of the one it had lost, insisting it would one day return. For the people already living in Taiwan, the arrival of the nationalists was not a liberation. It was the beginning of the darkest chapter in the island's modern history. The tension had already turned to blood 2 years earlier. February 27, 1947, evening in Taipei. Agents from the government's tobacco monopoly confront a widow selling untaxed cigarettes on the street. There is an argument. One of the agents strikes her across the head with his pistol. A crowd gathers, furious. As the agents flee, one of them fires into the crowd, and a bystander falls dead. By the next morning, the 28th of February, the anger has spread across the whole island. Years of resentment at a corrupt and contemptuous new administration break open at once. What began as one act of violence on one street becomes an island-wide uprising. The government's answer is annihilation. Reinforcements arrive from the mainland, and the nationalist forces move through the island, killing students, doctors, lawyers, local leaders, anyone who might organize, anyone who spoke up, anyone educated enough to be a threat. The estimates of the dead run from 18,000 to 28,000 people. The Taiwanese have a name for it, taken from the date, 228, the February 28th incident. And it was only the beginning. What followed was nearly 4 decades of martial law, one of the longest continuous periods of martial law anywhere in the modern world. The era is remembered as the White Terror. Anyone suspected of dissent, of leftism, of Taiwanese independence, of the wrong word to the wrong person, could vanish. Thousands were executed. Around 140,000 were imprisoned. To speak of the massacre at all was forbidden. For 48 years, the number 228 was a silence the whole island kept. Let that silence sit. There is no persistence lesson to draw from it, no uplift to reach for. A generation of the island's brightest was erased, and their families were made to say nothing for longer than most of those families' children would be alive to remember. Which is what makes what happened next so difficult to comprehend. Because the island that endured the White Terror is today one of the freest societies in Asia.
And the turning point
Came in a single year. A year almost no one recognized at the time as the hinge of everything. 1987. In July of 1987, after 38 years, martial law was finally lifted. The silence began, slowly, to break. Opposition parties, once illegal, became real. Within a decade, Taiwan held the first fully free, direct presidential election in the history of the Chinese-speaking world. In 1995, a president who had himself lived through the terror stood before the nation and did what no government had ever done: apologized, formally, for 228. Today, the 28th of February, is a national day of remembrance. The records have been opened, the dead are named. Taiwan built, out of one of the ugliest histories in modern Asia, a genuine democracy, a place with a free press, with fierce elections, the first place in all of Asia to recognize same-sex marriage. Its elections are ferociously contested and genuinely free. Its press is among the liveliest anywhere in Asia. In 2016, it elected its first female president. A society that once spent 40 years unable to speak of its own wound now argues about everything, loudly, in the open, which is, in its way, the surest sign that the terror is truly over. But 1987 gave the island a second gift in the very same year, and the two would turn out to be inseparable. Because while the political world was cracking open, in a quiet science park in the northern city of Hsinchu, a 55-year-old engineer was founding a company that would make Taiwan indispensable to the entire planet. His name is Morris Chang. And to understand why the modern world holds its breath over this island, you have to understand what he built and why he was the one who built it. Chang was born on the mainland in 1931, into the chaos of war. He fled it, made his way to the United States, and earned his degrees at the finest engineering schools in America. Then, he spent more than 2 decades at Texas Instruments, one of the great American semiconductor companies, rising nearly to the very top. Nearly, because he was passed over. The top job at Texas Instruments went to someone else, and Morris Chang, one of the most capable semiconductor minds of his generation, found the ladder had no more rungs. Hold on to that. A man passed over for the highest job at an American company. It does not sound yet like the beginning of a shield around an entire nation. In 1985, the government of Taiwan came looking for him. They wanted to build a high-technology industry from almost nothing, and they offered him the chance to lead it. Chang, in his mid-50s, left America and came to an island his family had never lived on to start again. And in 1987, he founded a company with an idea that everyone told him was backwards. Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. Here was the idea. At the time, the great chip companies, the American giants, did two things. They designed their chips, and they manufactured them in their own factories. Chang proposed to do only the second half. TSMC would design nothing of its own. It would build no branded product. It would be a pure foundry, a factory for hire that manufactured the chips other companies designed and competed with none of them. It sounds almost humble. It was the most consequential business decision of the century, because it split the industry in two and unleashed the other half. Suddenly, a brilliant engineer with a chip design and no factory did not need $1 billion to build one. They could design the chip and send it to Taiwan to be made. TSMC promised never to steal the design, never to compete. It would just build reliably, at a scale and a quality no one could match. An entire universe of companies was born from that promise. The chip designers you know, the ones that draw the processors for the phones and the graphics cards and the artificial intelligence, most of them do not own a single factory. They send their most valuable secrets to this island, and this island makes them real. The company whose logo sits on the back of your phone likely does not build the brain inside it. It sends the design here. The company powering the artificial intelligence boom, whose chips the whole industry is desperate to buy, it does not manufacture them either. It sends the design here. The names on the box change. The island stays the same.
Over the years that followed,
TSMC did something even harder than inventing the model. It kept its lead. As the physics of shrinking a transistor grew almost impossibly difficult, as the features on a chip shrank to the width of a few atoms, one company, on one island, stayed a step ahead of everyone else on Earth. Not a step ahead in one product, a step ahead in the ability to manufacture the future at all. To grasp how hard that is, consider what making one of these chips now demands. The patterns are so small that ordinary light cannot draw them. Its wavelengths are too coarse. So, the newest machines carve their circuits with extreme ultraviolet light, produced by firing a laser at droplets of molten tin tens of thousands of times a second inside a machine so complex that only one company on the planet knows how to build it. That light etches features only a handful of atoms wide onto a wafer of silicon. The work happens in clean rooms, where the air is thousands of times purer than a hospital's, because a single speck of dust would ruin a chip. The wafers are printed layer upon layer, through hundreds of steps that must each be very nearly flawless. One step slightly wrong, and the entire wafer is scrap. Only a tiny handful of companies in the world can do this at the leading edge at all. The one that does it best, at the greatest scale, is on this island. Today, more than 90% of the world's most advanced chips are made in Taiwan. The processor in the newest phone, the engines of the artificial intelligence boom. A vast share of the computing power the entire species adds each year comes from this single island, from factories clustered in a few science parks along its western plain. And Morris Chang, the man passed over for the top job in America, built On the island where he arrived, a stranger at 55, the most strategically important company on the planet. The rejection was the seed of the shield. A shield. That word is not decoration. On this island, people use it plainly. They call TSMC the Silicon Shield. And they mean that the chips may be the reason Taiwan still exists at all. And who are they, the people the shield protects? 23 million of them on an island the size of a small European country, one of the most densely populated places on Earth and one of the wealthiest societies in Asia, with universal healthcare, world-class transit, and a literacy that reaches almost everyone. They are the descendants of many arrivals, the indigenous peoples here longest of all, the Hokkien and Hakka settlers who crossed from the mainland over the centuries, the nearly 2 million who fled with the nationalists in 1949, and their children. For decades, those groups eyed one another warily, islander and mainlander, the ruled and the rulers. But across the generations, something quiet has happened. A shared identity has formed that did not exist before. Not mainland Chinese, not the old colonial subjects. Taiwanese, a people who increasingly define themselves by the island itself, its democracy, its freedoms, its sweet potato stubbornness, rather than by the mainland they are told they belong to. That identity is the one thing no factory can manufacture and no shield can defend. And it may be the deepest reason the island holds. But the chips are only the newest layer of this island. To feel the older ones, you have to leave the science parks and walk into the ordinary evening. Because for all the geopolitics, for all the fault lines and factories, the thing that surprises visitors most about Taiwan is how gentle it is. This is, by most measures, one of the safest, kindest, most easygoing societies in Asia, and nothing shows it like the night. As the light fades, the night markets wake up. In Taipei, in Kaohsiung, in Tainan, whole streets fill with steam and smoke and neon. Vendors ladle beef noodle soup, the unofficial national dish. Someone fries the notorious stinky tofu, whose smell precedes it by half a block, and whose devotees will hear no argument. And in a stall somewhere, a young worker seals a cup of milky tea over chewy pearls of tapioca. Bubble tea, invented on this island in the 1980s, now drunk on every continent. And beyond the cities, the small island hides an improbable variety of places to lose an evening. On the still water of Sun Moon Lake, at the island's heart, the surface changes color with the passing light. On a steep northern hillside, the old gold mining town of Jiufen stacks its lantern-lit tea houses one above the next, red light spilling down the alleys after dark. On the north coast, at Yeliu, wind and sea have carved the sandstone into shapes that seem to belong to another planet. Among them, a weathered pillar the whole island knows as the Queen's Head. In the mountain town of Pingxi, people still write their wishes on paper lanterns and release them, glowing, into the night. And in the tropical south, at Kenting, the island finally runs out of mountains and slides into warm sand and coral sea. All of it on a single island you could drive the length of in an afternoon. Here is what the world's cameras almost never show. The world sees Taiwan as a flashpoint, a choke point, a crisis waiting to happen, a line on a risk map. It sees the missiles across the strait and the factories full of chips. It rarely sees this. A Tuesday night, families at plastic tables, teenagers laughing over shaved ice, an old man threading his scooter through the crowd. The most dangerous place on the geopolitical map is also, on the ground, one of the most relaxed places you could possibly spend an evening. That gap between the headline and the street is the thing outsiders never quite believe until they stand in it. And woven through the ordinary life is something ancient, the temples. Taiwan is one of the most densely templed places on Earth. Thousands of them, folk shrines to a crowded pantheon of gods borrowed from Buddhism, from Taoism, from local memory. Incense hangs in the air of Longshan Temple in Taipei, where worshippers have prayed through earthquakes and colonizers and war. And once a year, the island's most beloved deity leaves her temple and walks. Mazu, the goddess of the sea, protector of sailors and fishermen, is carried in a palanquin on a pilgrimage that covers hundreds of kilometers over more than a week, followed by hundreds of thousands of the faithful on foot. It is one of the largest religious processions on the planet. A goddess of the sea, honored by the descendants of the greatest seafarers the sea has ever known. Above it all stands the island's boldest answer to the ground it is built on. In the heart of Taipei rises a tower shaped like a stalk of bamboo, segment stacked upon segment, 508 meters into the sky. Taipei 101. When it opened in 2004, it was the tallest building in the world. But the extraordinary thing about Taipei 101 is not its height. It is what hangs inside it. Near the top of the tower, suspended on thick steel cables, is a golden sphere weighing 660 tons, a tuned mass damper, the largest of its kind on public display anywhere. Here is how it works. When a typhoon slams the tower or an earthquake shakes its foundations, the building begins to sway, and the great golden pendulum swings the other way, a fraction of a second behind, a counterweight fighting the motion, absorbing the energy, letting the tower ride out the violence instead of resisting it rigidly and snapping. The tallest building in the world, on one of the most seismically violent islands on Earth, does not survive by being stiff. It survives by swaying, by bending with the force instead of standing against it. Hold that image, the golden weight that keeps the tower standing by letting it move. It is, in the end, the whole island in a single machine. Which brings us, at last, to the strait, and to the question the whole world is really asking about Taiwan. To feel it, you have to go to the very edge. Not to Taipei with its towers and its markets, but to a small island called Kinmen, out at the western frontier, so close to the mainland that from its beaches you can see the skyscrapers of a Chinese city across the water. A couple of kilometers of sea, that is all that separates them. Kinmen is where the two Chinas met and where they shot at each other for decades. In 1958, the mainland's artillery rained hundreds of thousands of shells onto this tiny island in a matter of weeks, one of the most intense bombardments of the entire Cold War. The shelling went on and off, for years. An island of farmers lived underground in tunnels while the world held its breath, waiting for a wider war that never quite came. The islanders dug in. They carved hospitals and barracks and whole assembly halls out of the granite, deep enough to ride out the shells. And for a time, the two sides fought a war of sound as much as steel. Vast banks of loudspeakers on each shore, hurling propaganda and music across the water at one another. A strange, nightly duel of voices over the same narrow sea. The shells left something behind, and in one of the strangest acts of persistence you will find anywhere, the people of Kinmen gathered the spent steel and turned it into blades. To this day, the island's most famous product is the kitchen cleaver, forged by hand from the artillery shells once fired to destroy it. A weapon of war, beaten into a tool for chopping vegetables. The bombardment still being used decades later to make dinner. That is Kinmen, and that is Taiwan. An island that takes what was hurled at it to end it and makes it into something that helps it live. Now stand on that beach and look across the water and hold everything this island has been. The homeland the seafarers left to populate half the world. The last redoubt of a fallen dynasty. The colony of Japan. The refuge of a defeated government. The killing ground of the White Terror. And, out of all of it, a democracy, and the workshop the whole modern world depends on. Here is the turn the world never sees coming. For thousands of years, Taiwan was the island people left, the place the canoes launched from and did not return to. A homeland the ancestors sailed away from, into the emptiness of the largest ocean on Earth. And now, it has become the exact opposite. The one island the world cannot afford to leave. The one place no great power dares to lose. By an accident of silicon and history, the island that everyone once sailed away from has become the island the entire planet is now bound to. That is the Silicon Shield, fully understood. It is the idea that the world's dependence on Taiwan's chips is itself a kind of protection, that no nation could seize this island or bomb its factories without breaking the supply of the very technology it needs to function. The chips make Taiwan too valuable to attack and too valuable to lose. A shield made not of walls, but of the world's own need. The scale of that dependence is hard to hold in the mind. If the factories on this island fell silent, through war, through blockade, through a single bad earthquake in exactly the wrong place, the world would not merely lose a supplier. The newest phones would stop coming. Car plants on 3 continents would idle for want of chips. The engines of artificial intelligence would starve. The estimates of the damage run into the trillions. And there is no second island. No one else can do what is done here at this scale for years to come. But a shield is not a guarantee, and the island knows it. Remember the crates, the imperial treasures that survived the 20th century by running from war again and again, refusing to stay still. A few years ago, the National Palace Museum began quietly rehearsing what it would do if war came to Taiwan. How it would pack the collection, where it would send it. The treasures that fled the mainland ahead of one army are being made ready, if it comes to it, to flee again. Nearly a century after those cartwheels rolled out of the Forbidden City in the dark, the crates are packed in the mind of every curator. The running may not be over, it may only be paused. No one can tell you how this ends, whether the shield holds, whether the strait stays quiet, whether the most important island on Earth spends the coming century in peace or becomes the place where the great powers finally collide. The people of Taiwan wake up every morning beneath that question and go to the night markets anyway, and raise their children, and make the chips, and carry the goddess to the sea. And in the cold streams high in the mountains, the salmon are still there. The salmon that lost their ocean when the Ice Age ended, that were trapped 10,000 years ago in a world that no longer had a place for them, and that simply refused to stop existing. A relic of an age that is gone, still alive against every reasonable expectation in the one cold corner where they could hold on. That is not really a story about a fish. It never was. It is the story of the island that shelters it. Taiwan is a relic too, in its way, the last piece of an old order that vanished everywhere else, an unfinished argument left over from a war that ended 80 years ago, a place that keeps being told it belongs to something larger and keeps, quietly, continuing to exist on its own terms. Like the salmon in the mountain stream, like the golden weight that keeps the tower standing by swaying, like the shells beaten into cleavers and the treasures packed to run, and the sweet potato that grows in any soil and refuses to die. The world may only know Taiwan for the chips, for the crisis, for the line on the map that everyone is afraid of. But the island was here long before the chips, and it has been claimed and colonized and abandoned and threatened for 400 years. And every time, it has done the one thing it has always known how to do. It has stayed. No one knows for how much longer the strait will stay quiet, or what the world will do if it does not. But tonight, the markets are open. The incense is burning. The golden pendulum is swaying, a fraction of a second behind the wind. And an island that officially does not exist is quietly holding up the future of everyone who says it doesn't. Thank you for spending this time with us, here at the edge of the world. Until the next journey.